This is NTV.
Just after 7 o'clock in Nairobi and across East Africa, and you're just on time for your world this Thursday, the second day of the month of September. A very good morning to you. Thank you for allowing us to kickstart your morning with this fantastic show that we have lined up for you. This morning, we'd like to talk about matrimonial property, especially after divorce, because when two people come together to start a family, the expectation, or at least the assumption, is that they will become one, at least until death does them apart, and whatever is mine is also yours. But what happens when the unexpected happens and they have to part ways? What happens to the property that they have jointly acquired over the years? The current law says matrimonial property should be shared as per contribution, but how do we determine or calculate a person's contribution? Those are the questions we will attempt to answer in today's conversation about matrimonial property after divorce. My name is Victor Kiprop, and this is Your World. Coming up, another new strain of COVID-19 detected in South Africa, Asia, and Europe. Johnson & Johnson's highly anticipated HIV vaccine fails efficacy trial.
The re-establishment of public services in all affected areas.
Over 7,000 schools damaged and 1.4 million students unable to attend school in Ethiopia's war-torn region of Tigray.
Some say it's 50-50. I think it should be weighed on individual contribution.
And marriage has ended, it's time to part ways. But how do we share matrimonial property after the divorce, and who takes what? Our discussion this morning. Right, matrimonial property after divorce. That's what we'd like to discuss this morning, and we want you to be part of this conversation. We're asking you this morning, how do you think matrimonial property should be divided or shared after divorce? How do you think matrimonial property should be shared or divided after divorce? You can send us your feedback at NTV Kenya at Victor Kiprop _. Use the hashtag #NewNormal so that we can see the tweets that you send us. You can also send that same feedback on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and elsewhere where we are streaming this morning. If you want to call in, the numbers will be below your screen in a short while. But before that, COVID-19 is still with us, and it's our duty to update you on the level of infection so far across the world and in Africa. These are the latest numbers according to Corona Tracker: 219,264,647. That's the number of people being confirmed with COVID-19 so far across the world. 196,041,211 of them have recovered. Notice the huge disparity. And of course, 4,545,125 people have sadly died due to COVID-19 so far across the world. These are the latest figures for Kenya, 236,881. That's the number of positive infections, or the number of people being confirmed with COVID-19 in Kenya. According to the Ministry of Health, 224,270 of them have recovered. But again, sadly, we've lost 4,739 people to COVID-19 in Kenya, and that figure continues rising. That's why we'd like to once again remind you to continue masking up at all times, sanitizing or washing your hands as regularly as you can, and maintaining the 1.5 meters social distance. Let's stay with COVID-19 in this wrap-up of our stories across the African continent. And while the Delta variant of COVID-19 continues to devastate many parts of the world, another variant called the C1.2 has been detected in South Africa and 7 other countries in Asia and Europe. Scientists say the C1.2 variant has drawn the attention of scientists as it appears to have the same characteristics as that of other mutations that are more transmissible and are more able to overtake a person's immune system. Tests to assess the impact of the mutations it possesses on infectiousness and vaccine resistance are still underway, but so far the virus has not fulfilled the WHO criteria to qualify as a variant of concern or variant of interest. The Delta variant is still the most dominant strain spreading across the globe. Let's stay in the country. And security and education officials on Wednesday interrogated teachers at Thiru Primary School in Laikipia West, where 3 students were reportedly tied to a tree as punishment for truancy. The photo, which went viral on social media, sparked anger from a section of Kenyans who condemned the act. A multi-agency task force has directed the Office of the Director of Criminal Investigations to investigate the 2 senior teachers at the school, as Rose Wangoi now reports.
A photo of 3 children tied to a tree in Thiru Primary School, Laikipia West, went viral on social media for the better part of Tuesday and Wednesday. In the pictures, 3 pupils aged between 7 and 11 years are tied with a rope to a tree within the school compound. The photo elicited anger from a section of Kenyans who argued that it was wrong for teachers to use such methods while disciplining students. And this morning, Nyahururu Deputy County Commissioner Moses Muroki, accompanied by officials from Teacher Service Commission and the Education Ministry, were on a mission to establish the truth behind the photo. They also interrogated teachers and the affected pupils.
We have actually found out this issue. It happened on 20th of August, 2021. It was a type of punishment because of truancy and because of delinquent of the pupils. That is why they did that.
Officers from the Children Protection Unit and those from the Director of Criminal Investigation were also present.
We like to apologize to our children. What they went through on 20th is unfortunate that our children could be subjected to very inhumane treatment, to make sure that at least they have psychosocial support and any other support they might want to get from the Department of Children's Services.
The Department of Criminal Investigations have taken up the matter.
TSC, we are going to go through the discipline process, and anybody found culpable, then disciplinary action shall be taken against them.
Ruzungoi, NTV.
Across the border, more than 7,000 schools have been damaged as a result of the expanding conflict in Ethiopia, according to the country's education minister, with 1.42 million students unable to attend classes in the war-torn region of Tigray. The United Nations reports that more than 5.2 million people require food supplies in Tigray, while over 300,000 people are now estimated to be displaced in the Afar and Amhara regions, as Leila Mohammed now reports.
As the conflict has deepened, the humanitarian toll has surged, with aid workers struggling to get cut-off populations and 400,000 people facing famine-like conditions in Tigray, according to the United Nations.
Unrestricted humanitarian access everywhere must be guaranteed, together with the re-establishment of public services in all affected areas.
The UN's humanitarian agency said the flow of aid to Tigray has virtually stopped since August 20th, with no trucks able to enter the region. Since the conflict erupted, PM Abiy Ahmed's government and the Tigrayan rebels have traded blame over the issue, with each side accusing the other of obstructing aid convoys and driving a desperate population into famine. The spokesperson for the Tigray People's Liberation Front has declined the AU's intervention in trying to mediate talks between the warring parties, accusing the AU of partiality towards the Ethiopian government. PM Abiy Ahmed rejected early appeals from high-level envoys from the AU for talks with Tigrayan leaders, sticking to his line that the conflict is a limited law and order operation. On Thursday, the bloc announced former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo's appointment as a High Representative for the Horn of Africa, saying it was part of a drive to promote peace, security, stability, and political dialogue.
It is time for all parties to recognize that there is no military solution. And it's vital to preserve the unity and stability of Ethiopia, which is critical to the region and beyond.
Although Washington has been openly critical of Abiy's handling of the war, African members of the United Nations Security Council have backed Ethiopia in opposing formal discussion of the situation in Tigray at the world body.
Elsewhere, Johnson & Johnson's highly anticipated HIV vaccine has failed to demonstrate adequate protection in a clinical trial involving more than 2,600 young women across sub-Saharan Africa. Though the vaccine was found to be safe with no serious side effects, its efficacy in preventing HIV infection was just over 25%, meaning it will now be halted. Helena Ura expounds.
After roughly 3 years of clinical trials for the HIV Phase 2 Imbokodo vaccine, scientists have opted to hang their boots on the study after data released by Johnson & Johnson and global partners indicated that the findings did not provide sufficient protection against HIV infection. But the vaccine was safe and did not cause any adverse effects.
Everyone in the trial, over the first 12 months of their participation, received 4 different injections. The first 2 were what we call the prime, and that was based on a cold virus, adenovirus 26. And then they received 2 further boosts of a protein booster to help stimulate the immune system.
Around 2,637 women in 5 countries where women and girls accounted for 63% of all new HIV infections in 2020. Malawi, Mozambique, Zambia, Zimbabwe and South Africa took part in the trials which researchers believed would prevent HIV. According to the data released through the 24 months of follow-up, 63 of the 1,109 participants who received the placebo compared to the 51 of the 1,079 participants who received the active vaccine acquired HIV.
Every trial like this, an efficacy trial, has a point estimate. So the estimate of how it worked, and then what we call the confidence interval. So the estimate of the effectiveness of this vaccine was about 25%. And the confidence interval spanned from -10 to just about 50.
On the other hand, Johnson said it will sponsor the ongoing Phase 3 Mosaico study, which is testing the safety and efficacy of a different composition of the HIV vaccine regimen among men who have sex with men and transgender individuals. The trial uses a different boost in a different region, America and Europe, where different strains of HIV are circulating.
Great. Remember, our conversation of the day is about matrimonial property after divorce and how it should be shared, how should it be divided, what does the law say. But before we get into that conversation, we went to the street and asked Kenyans, by the way, how do they think matrimonial property should be shared after divorce? And here is what some of them had to say.
Ile kiwango tutawachana, kitu ya kwanza ni kuangalia watoto, mmefanya nini katika hiyo familia yenu, hiyo ndoa yenu mmeweza kuendelea aje, nani alijangia, naona. Alafu sasa turudi tuangalie watoto. Iwapo tutawaachana, hii jukumu ya watoto inaendea nani na nani. Jukumu ya hasa watoto ndio tunaangalia sana kwa ndoa. Iwapo mama ataenda na watoto, sasa inabidi sasa achukue kiwango kubwa cha mali. Kama iwapo sasa mimi nitabakia na watoto, inabidi niwaachiwe kiwango kubwa cha mali, si ndio?
I think it depends on how the property was obtained first, because if you came and found me having something, then it means whatever I have is in my name, right? So when there is a divorce, I remain with my items. But if it's something that we worked for together, then 50-50 is a fair game.
Ninaweza sema mali isigaiwe. Kwa vile unajua wanawake wote wanafikaga ndani ya nyumbani wakiwa hawana chochote. Na watapata mali, tuseme wanaweza pata mali kutoka kwangu. Na tena yeye mwenyewe ndio atafanya kazi. Tuseme amenikuta nikifanya kazi. Na ndio ataanzisha biashara yake. Mpaka sasa yeye anapata tuseme anapata mali. Ikiwa sasa hizo mali tu inaonekana ni yetu na yeye ama pengine ni zangu.
Some say it's 50-50. I think it should be weighed on individual contribution based on the number of offsprings.
Kama watu wamekosana kwa ndoa, watoto lazima wakawe, kila kitu lazima ikawe kulingana na sheria. Juu before muone mko na kila kitu, lakini baada ya kuona sasa mkakuja mkashikana pamoja mkatafuta hiyo mali, lazima hiyo mali ikawanywe. Sasa
kama mali ni yangu, siwezi kukubali tugawanye mali. Kama watoto wameenda na watoto, na saidia watoto, lakini bibi aende kivyake.
Hapo itakuwa ni noma kidogo, lakini kwa sababu kama pia yeye amechangia kwa upande mwingine zaidi than mimi, itabidi tumepiga ratio yenye ni sawa. Lakini kama ni kwa upande yangu, kama mimi ndo nimetoa sana, itabidi tu negotiate na maisha yaendelee, sio kuachana tu.
Residents of Karisha, they're giving their views on how they think matrimonial property should be shared after divorce. Clearly, different opinions depending on the people interviewed for that conversation. And we also want you to be part of this conversation. We ask you once again, how do you think matrimonial property should be shared after divorce? How do you think matrimonial property should be shared after a divorce? You can tweet us at NTV Kenya and at Victor Kiprop _. Use the hashtag #NewNormal. You could also send that feedback on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, and elsewhere that we are streaming this conversation. If you want to call in, the numbers should be below your screen in a short while. But allow me to introduce the people who will help us actually understand and break down and dissect this conversation, differentiate, of course, the truth from people's personal opinions. And this morning I'm joined by Duncan Okauch, he's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. Good morning, Duncan. Karibu sana.
Thank you so much.
All right. Also joining us in studio this morning is Jackie K. She's a blended family coach. Good morning, Jackie, and karibu sana.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Asante. And Edwin Kibuth is also with us in studio this morning. He's an MSME business development advisor and consultant, but also has a personal story that he wants to share regarding today's conversation. Good morning, Edwin, and welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Great. So before we get into this conversation, there is what I and you think should be the basis of sharing matrimonial property. But we also have what the law says. We have fished out some few definitions and a few issues from the Matrimonial Property Act of 2013. Let's just get some definitions there. And according to this Act of 2013, matrimonial property should be, for purposes of this Act, matrimonial property means the matrimonial home or homes. If we can get the second, the household goods and effects of in the matrimonial home or homes, and any other immovable and movable property jointly owned and acquired during subsistence of the marriage. And then, subject to Section 6.3, that is now the issue of ownership, who owns what, and subject to Section 6.3 of the ownership of matrimonial property vests in the spouses according to their contribution. I want you to take this down very importantly, according to their contribution of either spouse towards its acquisition, and shall be divided between the spouses if they divorce or their marriage is otherwise dissolved. Remember that very well, because it will feature much importantly in this conversation. And lastly, how do we define a family? According to the the Article 45 of the Constitution of Kenya, it says parties to a marriage are entitled to equal rights at the time of the marriage, during a marriage, and at the dissolution of the marriage. So if parties are entitled to equal rights at the time of marriage, why don't we divide the property 50-50? That's part of the questions that we hope Duncan and my guest this morning will help us understand. But Duncan, that's really the basic definition of matrimonial property in the law, and it has some really legal jargon. But from where you sit, you know, when we come to this house, mimi nimeleta sofa set, wewe umeleta, mama ameleta kiti, mwingine ameleta sufuria. What really qualifies as matrimonial property?
Indeed, that has been a very big issue based on the historic part in terms of what informs our law. We borrowed our laws from Britain, and therein came the 1982 Married Women's Property Act. Indeed, previously from Britain, a woman could not have any property in her name. Actually, your property was to be registered in the name of your husband. Looking at it also in terms of a traditional setup, we still have or had that particular challenge, so that the property in any home will be defined as property based on the ownership by the man. So the lady could not actually have property in her name. So in terms of defining what then becomes matrimonial property, there was no need at all, because property belonged to the man, whether it's a sheep, whether it's a goat,
and that's unfair.
Ideally, it is unfair, and that's why the law has now progressed to try and define and give women their rights in marriage. And in fact, that's why our 2010 Constitution has now captured that very, very clearly, so that matrimonial property basically, first of all, is to provide that that particular home that you live in is a matrimonial property. The goods, the furniture, whatever is attached therein is matrimonial property. Over and above that, the law has even gone further and even described the businesses that are carried out in terms of the family, whether the family has a business or whether the business belongs to the man. It is regarded as matrimonial property. So that by a large extension, it is easy now to define or to know what qualifies as matrimonial property based on the law that we now enacted in 2013, the Matrimonial Properties Act in Kenya. So it is easily definable by law.
And I'm asking that because there's also the issue of now when we separate, which is the part of this conversation this morning, we will have to look at what did I bring. If I came with 10 acres of my land, are we going to divide this 10% or as per contribution as we move forward?
Indeed, after clearly defining what is matrimonial property, therein came the problem of at the point of separation, at the point of divorce, or at the point of annulment of a marriage. The Constitution has told us you are equal. Parties are equal at that particular instance, because if it's a case of death, then the law of succession will take over and tell us how to proceed with that. But in the instance of separation, annulment, or divorce, then how do we divide this particular matrimonial property? And I've seen even the people you've interviewed from Kericho. You can see there is a lot of diverse opinions. But the law has clarified that to the extent that in terms of division, it follows that aspect of equality. However, based on even this particular law, the courts have brought what I call more confusion, because we have courts, previously it was equality in terms of 50-50. Later on, we had a problem.
Maybe, Duncan, if we can hold it, let's just take these quick pictures from the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, where Kenya is once again receiving additional, of course, AstraZeneca vaccines. Let's get those pictures live from the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, where we are receiving additional vaccines for the country to continue fighting the coronavirus pandemic. Remember, Kenya and this entire African region is still one of those regions which the levels of vaccination, COVID-19 vaccination, are still low. And if you look at other regions like Europe and America, that's why we're seeing normalcy returning, because a huge part of the population has indeed been vaccinated. But Kenya, of course, has continued to try and continue looking for more ways of acquiring these vaccines. We've received from different countries, including Denmark. We've just received another batch from the United Kingdom just last month. I believe this should also be the second batch from the United Kingdom, as the country continues to see how it can vaccinate its people. Maybe if we can, as we continue to get those pictures, we can get you statistics from the Ministry of Health. So far, according to the number of people being vaccinated so far for COVID-19, These are indeed the latest figures from the Ministry of Health. These updates are given out every day for those who've been vaccinated for the first dose and those who've been, of course, received their second dose to make sure that they're indeed fully vaccinated. But other countries and advanced economies like the US are already discussing issues of COVID-19 booster shots, but the WHO has said that there's no scientific evidence for the need of booster vaccines, and that they said it's morally wrong for these countries to be, looking for additional booster shots when countries across different parts of the world like Asia and Africa are still struggling with, of course, vaccinating their people, especially for the first dose. And these are the latest figures according to the Ministry of Health. Total vaccination so far, 2,792,309 doses of COVID-19 vaccines have been, of course, given out. But 1.9 million, that is 1,985,905. That's the number of people who have received their first dose of COVID-19 in Kenya. And those who have received their second dose, which means they're fully vaccinated so far in Kenya, is 806,404, which is a really a low figure given the population of this country. The 2019 statistics census put it around somewhere 47.6 million, and I believe 20 million of them should be adults who qualify to be vaccinated so far. So at 800,000, it's still a very low figure, but as we mentioned, those are live pictures from the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport as Kenya receives an additional batch of COVID-19 vaccines. I believe those are the AstraZeneca vaccines donated by the government of the United Kingdom. But our cameraman Eric Isinta is on the ground, and of course Eunice Omola and the entire health desk will be following up to give you a more comprehensive report on Kenya's COVID-19 vaccination efforts. Let's just return to and resume our discussion in the studio about matrimonial property and divorce. And unfortunately, Duncan, I cut you. Should allow me to just give you an opportunity to finish your point here.
Thank you. I was indicating that unfortunately the courts in their pronouncements have not done justice in terms of trying to stabilize this particular notion of how do we attribute or how do we apportion division of matrimonial property. There's the aspect in the current law that there is something we call contribution, so that it's not a must that you must have contributed equally in terms of the purchase of a property financially. But there are many other aspects in terms of looking at contribution. To that extent, the law says how you've taken care of children domestically, whether you've assisted in the business, whether you've even companionship can be taken. But how do you quantify it?
Yes.
So we have had a problem in terms of how there is no formal way of quantifying that, so that it depends on court to court. To that extent, as much as the principle is 50-50, some courts have applied contribution, and you find that the principle changes to 70-30 to 60-40. It depends. So there is no stability.
Even before we ask ourselves what qualifies as contribution, how do we define contribution, and how do we quantify issues like companionship and child care, as you mentioned. Let me just bring in Edwin here and just get his opinion like any other Kenyan. Edwin, from where you sit, what do you think about the current law in terms of how it defines how it should be shared as per contribution?
Thank you for having me today. I think I share the same sentiments with Wakili there. I'm a divorcee myself, and I left. We separated a few years ago. What is very interesting is that my view in this sense was that where are the children going? Initially, the mother had the primary custody with the children, and therefore when we were separating, I felt that it was good for the kids to have some level of continuity, and they don't feel like they've been deprived of property or anything that they were using in the house. For example, if I woke up and went away with the microwave, or I took the TV, or I took the couch, or I took a bed, or a mattress, or a duvet, or whatever it was, then where would the children sleep if they are in their mother's house? So my decision at the point was, let me leave whatever is there to the children, and hope that the children will be able to use it properly. So Yeah, so that's basically what happened to me at the beginning. I left with only a bag, and I left everything in the house.
And I'm sure that's one of the very many cases and situations out there, and I believe Duncan must have very strong opinions on that. But even before we get there, let me just bring in Jackie. Jackie, this is a difficult conversation considering no one even goes to marriage, first of all, expecting that we will part ways, because if we were expecting that, there's even no need to go into it in the first place.
Sorry? I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, I'm asking, this is a very difficult and sensitive and emotive conversation by the fact that no one actually goes into this expecting that we will separate. No one gives their energy in acquiring property at some point thinking that we are going to part ways, because if that is the expectation, then maybe there's not even need to go into the marriage in the first place.
That's true. Nobody gets into marriage thinking that it will come to an end. The reason we get married is till death do us part. But unfortunately, life happens, and divorce can become part of your journey. I am learning more from the lawyer, and even the fact that the 50-50 law, at times by the end of the court process, does not turn out to be 50-50. But I guess how to quantify or show my contribution, and especially as women, at times becomes such a challenge. And there are so many women out here. And of course, as Edwin mentioned, when the women suffer, most cases, the kids also suffer as a result of divorce. So I am glad to be here, and I would really want to know more of how women can quantify it. How do they show their contribution that is not monetary?
Okay. Let me just bring in, come back to you, Duncan, on this issue of contribution, clearly, because that's where the problem is. So it's fine. We agree that we should do this on the basis of contribution. But what is contribution? What defines contribution? Is it just monetary? How do we calculate non-monetary contributions?
Kiprop, the Act tried to define this because there was a lot of confusion on what is contribution. Because initially, it was supposed, the principle was 50-50. We don't need to look at contribution. All we need to look at is the totality of the assets and liabilities and divide them by 2. However, the courts have tried quite a lot to move away from that and try to say that it is contribution. In fact, in 2015, FIDA petitioned and said that Section 6 and 7 of this particular act, Matrimonial Properties Act, is actually unconstitutional because it tries to bring in that issue of contribution, tries to say that indeed this is how you can look at contribution. But FIDA said, no, the Constitution says we are equal. So equal in the real sense of it is divided by 2. The courts dismissed that petition in 2018 and said, no, that will allow someone to just come in and get out for purposes of getting quick
this is
riches.
The fortune seekers conversation that we had before we had this new Matrimonial Property Act.
Exactly. So to that particular extent, and for some reason, immediately in 2018, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights came up and said that all state parties to the Maputo Protocol should ensure that the division of matrimonial property is actually about equality, not about an issue of contribution. So it expected that we would thus develop the law or even amend our laws as we have currently to remove this issue of contribution. So because our law, we actually enacted it in 2013, and we are state parties to the Maputo Protocol. So as we speak, there is a bit of unconstitutionality in relation to the Maputo Protocol. But having said so, what currently abounds is that the Act says clearly that contribution is one, your domestic contribution in terms of taking care of the house, taking care of the child, or the children, so that even if you don't go to work and you're just at home, that is contribution.
Allow me to hold you there, Duncan, because let's say we are talking, because I think I mean, Jackie has raised a very valid point on where women are asked to prove, you know, to assert their ownership or their contribution. Because let's say we're talking about, let's say, a property. Let's say it's an apartment, flats that we've developed and people are renting it. It costs 10 million shillings or 20 million shillings currently. But it was largely developed by the husband using maybe, let's say, a facility borrowed from a bank. But for him to be able to do that, the wife during that period was able to take care of the children, maybe use her salary to cover the basic needs of the family, including rent and all that, which means that the only reason you were able to develop the property is because she took care of other equally important responsibilities in the family. So how does the court decide what percentage she takes? Because they could decide it's just 15% and it might not be fair, at least from where I sit.
And therein lies the biggest challenge in terms of division of matrimonial properties from the courts. Because we ought to have had a standard guideline on how do you assess this contribution. But ideally, it may be a bit difficult because we may talk about there is a family that has only one child, others have 5, 6, 10. There is no way of apportioning that contribution. It is left to the judicial officer. So each judicial officer will come up with their own way, which to a large extent may be perceived as fair, to a large extent may be perceived as unfair. So it is pretty hard for you as a lady going to ask for your contribution to be assessed because you do not have any parameters of contribution. There are children who are so stubborn that you believe that ideally your contribution should even be higher. But it becomes very hard. In fact, what curtails this is because ideally contribution should be something that you can bring proof. Ideally, it should be something like receipts. This is what I've done. This is what you find that ladies, even for the things they've bought in the house, 1, 2, the nyanyas, the vitungus, they will not have those receipts. So it becomes pretty difficult to actually prove. So the law itself, and that's why to an extent I personally agree with Fida, it actually makes it a burden for you as a woman to go and prove to this particular court, because the burden of proof now shifts to you to actually demonstrate that contribution.
The burden of proof.
Yes, shifts to you, which is unfair because the man will just be there and wait for you to prove. If you don't prove, unfortunately, that's it. He doesn't have to prove. So to a large extent, you look at all what we are calling contribution without a formal way of even assessing that contribution, whether it is the issue of taking care of the child, whether it is companionship itself. How do you assess that contribution of companionship? Whether it is the fact that I used to also help you in terms of going to buy any of the supplies for your business or the shop, it's very hard to prove. So that particular aspect is a bit of an encumbrance to a lady trying to prove contribution and should be relooked at by the policymakers and parliament.
Let me just bring in Edwin at this point. Edwin, you decided to walk away and leave literally everything that you had perhaps invested all your life trying to develop all these years. Just take us back to that decision that you made, because, I mean, yes, there are the children behind, but this is also your life sacrifice. It's probably taken you years to acquire this.
I think what people don't realize is that at the point of separation or divorce, there's a lot of emotional tug of war that has happened between the two partners. For you to get to a point where you're deciding I want to separate or divorce, it means you have gone through a lot and it's just enough. So I think for me, I'd reached a point where I'd said my emotional health was not good, my physical health was not good, my career, my professional health was not good, and I felt I needed to take a break.
To just walk away.
Just to walk away. So when that happened is that I did not want any more conflict. Conflict had been too much in the years before the separation. And so I felt if I have been able to acquire some of this, the household goods, the cars, the what, and the property here and there, I'm still able to acquire them once I get myself back to my feet. So one of the reasons I decided to walk out with only my bag, and we had 2 cars, so I took one car, she took the other. I left one because I didn't want any conflict. I didn't want any fights. Because I knew the divorce, if was going to take some time, it might have to go to court. So one, I didn't want any fights, I didn't want any conflicts. And then second, I wanted my children to be comfortable. I have 3 children, and they're pretty young. The last 2 are pretty young at the time. And so they are not seeing their daddy in their house anymore. But it would even be worse if daddy has gone with the TV, daddy has gone with the fridge, daddy has gone with the cooker, daddy has gone, and daddy has left us with a mattress in the house. So that informed my decision, and I actually started from scratch again.
Okay.
With nothing,
yeah. Now that you've touched the issue of emotions, let me just bring in Jackie, because she interacts with these couples every day and the process that they go through. Jackie, sometimes out here we cannot really tell how much of a turmoil this means for someone's mental health and even physically, as Edwin has said, this entire process of divorce.
Divorce is like death, because something is coming to an end. And just like death, there's grieving. One of the things that Adrian has mentioned that is crucial for us to know, by the time somebody walks out of the door, that's not the day the divorce started. You know, the separation started way earlier. In most cases, one of the spouses begins to leave way earlier, and the other one may not even be aware that the marriage ended. The marriage does not end when somebody walks out the door. That is just physically now they are walking out. But emotionally, the marriage may have ended way back. Yeah.
Okay.
And sorry?
Yeah, just proceed. Yes, proceed.
So one of the things that we should know as we are going through divorce, that it has psychological effects on us. It is like death. We will grieve and we will need healing because it is something, a very significant life circumstance in our lives.
Yeah.
So one needs to take care of themselves and pursue their own healing.
Okay, and if I can use Edwin as an example then, that it means all these are the things that perhaps are rightfully yours, but because of the emotional weight that you carry, the mental strain that you have gone through, there's not even time to look back and remember all those things.
That could be right, and at times they cost stuff. When you put stuff and you put your mental health, you know, you can let go stuff and just pursue your mental health. And I think also we don't need to fight immediately. You can take care of your mental health and then you can discuss stuff later. So at times the pursuit of peace is more valuable than the pursuit of stuff, the pursuit of my kids' needs. Because one of the things that I tell my clients every time, and I love saying, there are no ex-children. We just have an ex-wife, an ex-husband. So even in the depth of these emotions, in the depth of the turmoil, in the depth of heartache because of divorce, as Edwin mentioned, one of the things that he didn't forget is the children. What can I do to make the children comfortable, even though the marriage has ended?
Jackie, I like the fact that you bring in the children here, because in the messy world of divorce and court cases and all that, people don't even remember the children and what it means for them mentally at that very young age.
Yeah, we forget the children because we are so busy looking at our wound and our heartaches, but the people who suffer more are the children. So as you end the marriage, as a couple, always remember the kids. Love your kids more than you hate your ex. So don't fight and fight until you're using even kids to fight your ex. Love them more than you hate your ex, if at all you hate him or her.
Let me bring in Duncan on the issue of children. So does this in any way affect how much I'm going to go away with?
In the actual sense of it, it does not, because if you are looking at matrimonial property, it is devoid of any other issue, children or otherwise, because the issue of children is dealt with in a separate court. Previously, we used to handle all children matters, divorce together with matrimonial property together. It's now separated. We have a fully fledged children's court dealing with the children's matters, divorce matters, and we have the matrimonial matters being dealt with separately. Looking at the children's matters, the court will provide that each spouse is actually entitled to provide to the extent of the provision depends with now the strength of each spouse. So that is dealt with differently. But on this one, it is about you as the husband and the wife who are separating. What is your personal entitlement? And it will not be proper to say that in the eyes of matrimonial property, you'll actually cede your rights, because that one now you are going to the ambits of the children's matter and the children's court. You are allowed to even say, because of the children, I will actually, and because I need to provide shelter, I will leave that house for them, so that it isn't my load in terms of provision of shelter or financial support towards shelter. But in terms of matrimonial property, looking at any other property, because matrimonial property is defined as property that you have acquired during the subsistence of that marriage. Property that you've inherited does not qualify. But if you inherit property and the wife contributes to increasing that value, the additional value is actually matrimonial property by itself. Secondly, there is also a very important aspect that people must now know, that the law itself has now provided for prenups. So that if you believe that the issue of property should not come in between you, you are allowed even to have a prenup agreement, which will be respected to the extent that what is mine, what is yours is yours. To that particular extent, there should this issue of division will not come into play.
So prenuptial agreements is where we say Duncan came with a car and he came with a shamba. In any case, when we separate, he should go with this.
No, not at all. What you came with by law is not actually matrimonial property. What you acquire within the subsistence of the marriage is now matrimonial property. To that extent, a prenup says that as A is marrying B, you are indicating that what will be in A's name will remain his to the end of that marriage, regardless of how it ends, save for death. But what is in the name of the wife, acquired by the wife, remains the wife's, regardless of the issue of the Matrimonial Properties Act.
Jackie, before we take this break, I just want to get your opinion on the issue of prenuptial agreements, because there are those who argue that, you know what, maybe it's not morally right. Sasa tukianza kusema hii ni yangu na hata ndio hatujaanza ndoa, ni kumaanisha we will separate halfway there.
I think it depends with one's perception. If you are evolved enough and you know yourself enough, then you wouldn't feel like, oh my God, he asked me for a prenup, so it means that he doesn't love me. So it's dependent on one's perception. But I know there's a lot of argument and discussion around prenups, because some psychologists will say, it's like preparing for the end. At the beginning, you know, instead of planning how do we equip each other and make sure that we live and get this till death do us part.
And for most people, it's to protect themselves from what you'd call mpango wa kando, that comes halfway there and tries to go away with what you and I have built.
Yeah, but I don't know if the lawyer can clarify. I don't know if mpango wa kando can sign it.
Can this protect me from mpango wa kando or polygamous marriages after that?
It can, to the extent that, you see, if there is ultimate distribution in terms of half-half, obviously someone will say that someone else can benefit. However, the way the law is now, it actually should protect you from mpango wa kando, because the mpango wa kando will benefit from the half that goes with the man. But half remains with you.
So it is 2 million, which is 1 million each, and then 1 million yangu ndio tutagawa.
Then 1 million gana na you are 3 for mpango wa kando. You'll get less.
Very interesting conversation. We have to go for a quick break. But of course, when we come back, we still have your feedback that you've been sending us on social media, as well as our vox pops and sound bites that we've asked Kenyans across the country. Don't go too far.
Kingdom Bank, a subsidiary of the Cooperative Bank of Kenya, welcomes you and your business to all our 17 branches in key towns across Kenya. Come open your business account today and get immediate access to mobile banking, debit card services, and more. In addition, you can earn a good interest on your deposit. Let's do business together. We too are you.
Customer preferences are changing daily. You wake up one day, an innovation has come up and the customer wants a service in a way that you've not delivered before. Textbook Center aims to provide service, products and solutions that exceed our customers' expectations. Partnering with Sendi Transport ensures that we are able to deliver on our promise of being more than a bookshop.
Did you know at Ruiru Mabati Factory, we offer free delivery within the same day? Did you know at Ruiru Mabati Factory, you can open an account and lipa pole pole at your convenience? Did you know at Ruiru Mabati Factory, you can get customized sizes according to your roof plan to avoid wastage? Call us now on 0111 050 700. Ruiru Mabati Factory, mali safi kwa bei poa.
Chaudhry is so handsome, so hot, he's just so perfect.
I hope my brother Charlie doesn't hear you,
I would rather the kid get into the music industry instead of having anything to do with your business.
This song is just so beautiful, I can't believe it. Who wrote it?
Now who's for? For Koi Fish!
Wow, thank you for your time. How juicy.
Juicy. Juicy.
Lucozade. Energy to get through it.
Thank you for staying with your world on NTV. This morning we are talking about matrimonial property after divorce. How should it be shared between the parties in that relationship or that family? And my guest, Duncan Okach, an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, is still with me. And of course, as well as Edwin Kibudhu and Jackie is also with us for this conversation this morning. And remember, we asked you to be part of this conversation. On our question of the day, we asked you, how do you think matrimonial property should be divided or shared? How should matrimonial property be shared among the partners? And this is what some of you are saying on social media. George Odhiambo says nothing should be divided. Kila mtu abebe kitu alikuja nayo. Thank you, George. Vincent says, why do you think you deserve what you didn't contribute to? Take yours. It's that simple. Thank you, Vincent. We have Dave Were says, as per each one's contribution in acquiring it. I think majority of you agree with what, of course, the law says. But that is on social media. But we're also in the streets, and we asked you the same question. Let's get to see what Kenyans across the country have been saying.
Ninapotoka nyumbani kwetu kuoleka, nimekuja kwangu. Wakati tunaachana na mtu tunakawana mali katikati. Maana wanaume wengi wako na mipango ya kando, mali mingi inaishia kwa mipango za kando. Nikichukua mali watoto ni wangu. 18 years nitakurudishia, lakini lazima kama atasupport watoto sawa, na kama hawezi watoto nitakaa nao mwenyewe.
Wanaume siku hizi wanasumbua sana. Hata kama tukikosana kama tunaachana, mali tunagawana wote.
If the property was acquired before getting married, there is no share. But suppose now someone comes in and then he contributes. That one we must share 50-50. Otherwise, pre, that one cannot be shared. Some ladies are hunting men who are rich already. Thereafter, they divorce after 1 year or 6 months. Does that qualify her to share the property? So those are the factors we consider when we are sharing the properties. If possible, you have 2 or 3 children or 4 children. That one qualifies us to share the property even a quarter way or halfway.
Sasa mkiniambia nitoke, mimi sitatoka. Hiyo mali lazima tugawane katikati. Hata ikuwe nini, kwa sababu alimpotezea muda, siwezi enda kwingine.
Mali ni katikati, sababu wakati mlianza mlioana hamkuwa na mali, lakini mmetengeneza mkiwa pamoja. Sasa imekuwa sasa mnawachana, lazima muone katikati.
Kama alikuwa anatafuta mali yake na mimi natafuta mali yangu, tukikosana yeye anachukua mali yake na mimi nachukua yangu.
All right. Duncan, let me just come back to you on something very much interesting, because we have only spoken about the assets, which is the land, the car, which everyone really wants. But there's also the other side of something else that we also co-own that no one wants to talk about. So the property that we own was developed using a loan that we took together. So what happens to that? We also share liability. And we have loans that perhaps I took to maybe use it to develop the family, but it is under my name. But you also benefited in that arrangement. So how do we go about that?
Kiprop, that is a very, very important question. I'm glad that you've asked it. Indeed, most people assume that when we talk about matrimonial property, you are only talking about assets, tangible assets. And they forget that liabilities are also included in this particular issue of division of property. So that if you are entitled to an asset in terms of a certain percentage, you are also entitled to an equal share of liability that attaches to it. So that you may find that in a marriage, there are no assets. In fact, they are, worth assets is in the negative. Then it means what is there to be divided is actually liabilities. And the reality of the matter is that even those liabilities ought to be shared in the same proportion that someone will have been gunning for an asset. So many a times you find that the money is left to deal with the loans or to deal with the liabilities, but the assets are the ones that presumably are to be shared with the exiting spouse of the female gender, which is not the correct position. So it should be noted that all assets, all liabilities are supposed to be divided in the same proportion. If you say 50-50, like I've had other people say, the same applies. If you say it should be in terms of contribution, still it will apply in terms of that. But the principle behind it, it is shared.
Okay. So sometimes during this because marriage is meant to be happy, and most of the time it's happy. But there are one of those days when now it's no longer tenable and we have to part ways. But during those happy days, there are things that we do. As a sign of love, we gift each other cars, we buy each other, different assets, a laptop worth thousands of money as a gift. Lakini ile siku ya kwenda, I start to remember, hii gari I spent 2 million buying you. What happens to what I gave you as a gift, but now it's time to go?
Indeed, Kiprop, that takes us also to what constitutes a matrimonial property. And the question therein is, does a gift constitute a matrimonial property at the point of division? And the Act is very clear on that, that if I gift you something in the subsistence of the marriage, that particular gift is separate. It cannot, at the point of dissolution of that marriage, be termed as a property of actually the union. So that is a separate item. If you are gifted a flat, if you are gifted a car, if you are gifted monies, those become personal and do not constitute.
But there's no what? There's no proof that there's no arrangement that we write between me and you that I have gifted you this. I have just given it to you.
That is a gift. Actually, that's
But receipt yuko kwa duka, si mimi ndio nilinunua.
The receipt can actually bear your name, but you see, the moment you have gifted it to someone, and we've seen many people during birthdays, we've seen even in Nairobi, and it's happening in the open, and cameras your cameras are always there to show that someone has gifted someone a Range Rover. You know, you cannot run away from that. That becomes a personal item. But if it is something that was bought, let's say, like my colleague panelists say, there were 2 cars. If those cars were just for the use of the house or the union, then that cannot be termed as a gift, because it was the understanding was that it's just for the house. But if he had actually given the 2 cars to the wife and said, I've gifted you these 2 cars, at the point of dissolution, it cannot be upon him to say that I want to leave this for you or not. That becomes separate property, and you cannot even touch it.
Okay, let me just bring in Edwin. Edwin, part of the reason yours was a very smooth process is because you decided to leave a lot behind. And one could argue, and you actually put it yourself, was that because it was already a very tiring experience and exhausting, you just wanted to go. But looking behind now, given that these are things you invested a lot yourself, do you regret anything? Do you regret leaving perhaps a huge chunk of what you perhaps invested in your younger and active years behind?
Okay, I think I'll answer that in 2 ways.
Yes.
Right now, I don't regret it because it's been 5-6 years, and I've been able to build myself up slowly and acquire some of those things that I left behind. But at the beginning, when I moved from a fully furnished house into a 1-bedroom apartment with only a mattress, I wanted to go back and get some of those things. I really wanted to go and say, what have I put myself into?
Because sleeping on the floor, but you know you have bought beds in this life, Bwana.
Yes, there were probably 6 beds in the house, and there was a couch, there were carpets, there was, there was a lot of things, comfortability. I was comfortable. But for the first few months or the first year after separation, it was difficult, and I was really tempted to say, I think we need to divide these things. We need to
reconsider the arrangement.
Yes, because now having a kitchen that has no fridge, having a kitchen that has no microwave, so food was takeaway for a few months. When the kids used to come and visit me, because we have a shared agreement, shared custody, so the kids used to come, I used to tell them that we are camping. Because we only had a mattress in the sitting room, there was nothing else. So we are camping, and the food we're eating is takeaway, chips, pizza. So they were excited to come and see Daddy and spend the weekend and camping. So when I realized they did not, my kids did not feel bad about my situation of not having chairs, of not having a bed, and it was exciting for them to come and camp in my house, then I settled a little bit, and I said, it's the time I spend with the children
that matters
than the property and the matters to them. So I started to cool down, and after that I started to build myself slowly again. So right now I don't regret that decision.
Okay.
Completely.
All right, thank you. Allow me to just take a caller. We have Peter from Nairobi. Good morning, Peter. Karibu sana for the show. Do you have a question or a comment?
Thank you very much for the matter that is on matrimonial issues. I have a specific 2 questions, and they are very short ones.
Yes, sir.
Question number 1 is that I have a real life situation, which is actually in my family, whereby my father had had lived with my mother. They got engaged in the 1950s, and my father divorced my mother sometime in the early 90s, and my father picked up another woman whom they have been living with till today.
Yeah.
The property my father had when they were with my mother, that property is still in my father's name. Nothing has ever been changed. Now today, my mother is kind of intending to make, to go after the property, and yet my father is still alive. That is 30 years after she was divorced. I would like to know what happens in a scenario like that.
Okay.
The second one is that my father inherited a piece of land, which is 5 acres from his own father. That is inheritance. He was given that property even before he married the first wife, and even before he took up the second one. Do these 2 wives have any, do they have any, can they access that land that was actually given to my father by his father through an inheritance?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. Very, very, very good questions. I believe Duncan has taken down both of them and will allow you to respond at least as per the law.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think Peter's question is something that is shared widely by many people, because you find that, and I always say that in terms of divorce, the children must actually be part of that particular process, because they still suffer in one way or another. In this particular instance, unfortunately, the separation was in, I think, 1990.
Yeah.
It's before we actually had the 2010 Constitution, before we had the marriage, the Matrimonial Properties Act. And these particular acts are not implemented going backwards. They're actually implemented going forward in terms of if there is a separation at that particular point. So to a large extent, in terms of application of this law to this one, there may be some difficulty. And to that particular extent, even the time period it has taken, because the current lady with the father, if there is a separation, the act will actually apply, and she will actually be entitled to what has been acquired in between. Most of these cases are sorted out, unfortunately, through the law of succession, because that property then, the mother is still entitled despite the separation, and the children are entitled. In terms of his second question, issues of inheritance, the Act is very clear that property that has been inherited does not form part of, was inherited before you met, does not form part of the matrimonial property. Property inherited after you have met actually becomes, because it's property now that is a property of the union, forms part. However, as I've indicated, property that is inherited before and you contribute in terms of value, that value can be assessed, and that is your contribution. But as a rule of the thumb, you do not include inherited property. We have property held in trust, like property that is supposed to be bequeathed to other generations. Those properties do not form part of the matrimonial property because it will be bequeathed to your children. So it's still a benefit directly.
Let me just bring in Jackie. Jackie, if you look at, Edwin today, it's one of those very rare cases. It's very hard to find this very civilized and sober kind of separations, because most of them are so messy.
Yeah, because behind divorce there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of negative emotions. Without the negative emotions, we wouldn't divorce. I must say that I think we are getting to a point of civilization. We are not yet there, but we are getting to a point of being civil. And that is why we find statements of both exes putting the statements out there on social media and saying, due to we couldn't reconcile our differences, so we have gone our separate ways. We are not yet there, but we are working our way towards conscious uncoupling. You know, can we separate consciously? Because we are both aware that this is not working. Very few of us are there. Some, it has to be messy.
What kind of support do we need at this point, at this messy point when everyone is literally losing their minds, they don't want to see each other? What kind of support do we need so that we can ensure that at least it becomes a bit, in your own words, civil?
Maybe one of the things that we need to do is to get a bit of separation for some time. I'm thinking one of the things that also you could do as a couple is get somebody to come into the marriage, try therapy, and if the therapy does not work, then go for therapy so that you get skills and strategies on how to do this, how to divorce, but in a conscious way, in a way that does not hurt you, in a way that does not hurt your ex, and especially in a way that does not hurt the children. Children can heal after a divorce. Not totally, but it is possible to heal. However, parents who continue to have conflict even years after they've divorced, they actually give their kids a small chance of healing, because you see, it's like a wound that is never healing. They were divorced, but they're still fighting. So one of the things is to learn how to do this in such a way that you can protect the children that you have.
Okay. Thank you. Let me just take another call. We have Purity from Nairobi. Good morning, Purity. Karibu kwenye show. Which do you have a question or a comment for our conversation this morning?
Okay. Good morning to you all.
Yes, Purity.
I'm Purity.
Yeah.
Okay. Naongea kwa Kiswahili.
Ongea kabisa.
Okay. Niko na dadangu ambaye ameaga.
Okay. Pole sana, pole sana.
Thank you. Walikuwa na property na mume wake, of which iko joint. And she passed on, and kuna mtoto ambaye baba mume mwenye amemuoa sio baba ya mtoto. And the rest it's in a joint. Then wakati aliaga, mume hajashughulika eneo, mama ameshughulika kumsika hospitali. The time my sister was sick, the husband didn't even come. Alikuja akabreak the house, akachukua vitu za nyumba. Akapeleka nyumbani kwa, of which ako na bibi mwingine. Na tukua sister yangu hakuwa anajua. She married my sister legally. Now the issue here is, hiyo shamba iko joint sahi, itafanyika aje? Kutaenda aje ndio angalau mtoto wa dadangu apate kitu?
Asante. Swali nzuri sana, Purity. Asante sana. I'll allow you, Duncan, to jump into it because there's an issue of succession, there's an issue of property as well.
Yes, I think for Purity, it is mainly now falling under succession, and that's where people must differentiate. Because when we are talking about the matrimonial property, is for parties or marriages which are dissolved by virtue of separation, divorce, but not by virtue of death. Once death occurs, the law of succession takes place. So as far as the law is concerned here, the law of succession will actually indicate that, and actually the estate created is for the lady, so property owned by the lady. In this particular instance, when you have joint ownership, it is a point where many people confuse and are not keen. When you have joint ownership, the law is very clear that if one spouse dies, the property immediately in whole is owned by the surviving spouse without even going through succession. It is actually something that people register properties jointly without thinking about the consequences. And herein lies the problem. If the lady dies and the husband is moving on, he will move on with that property as his own entitlement. So that is a very big
What's
issue.
the remedy then here? What's the remedy here? Because, I mean, the ideal situation is we are very young, we just have one kid, we are in our 30s, and in most situations, unlike our expectations, most people remarry and they don't necessarily take care of the child that we sired together. And this child is just left at the mercy of relatives and all that. But ideally, at least from where I sit, they deserve something from what we jointly owned as the parents of this child.
Indeed, under ordinary circumstances, if you jointly owned some things, then some of those, if they are not jointly registered, or they are registered in terms of now, I own 50% share in this property, 50% share in that property. That 50% forms part of the estate of the deceased spouse. And that can actually be used to support these particular surviving kids. So there's a way in terms of which you can deal with it. But if you register it jointly in that particular manner, and it automatically is owned by the surviving spouse, you find that there's very little in terms of the law. All you can do is they can take the man to a children's court, and he has to now provide for this particular child. Okay. That at least is available for them.
Okay. Now, let me come back because she has raised another very valid point about the fact that the marriage and the union between the late sister and the husband was actually legal. And this takes me to my next point of can we stays? Where do they fall in this whole spectrum?
Come we stay, and I remember we discussed it in the last session, we discussed this aspect, because the law has a provision of a presumption of marriage, because we are looking at matrimonial property, means that there's a union. So that the law also says, and that's where the Marriage Act also comes into play. Yeah. There are different forms of marriages recognized under the law. But you must actually now formalize those marriages. You do not just say that it is a come we stay. You must actually ensure that you register those marriages. Gone are those days when we used to say that that presumption alone is enough. Previously, if you used to live like like husband and wife, people will testify they lived as man and wife. The court will actually say, yes, you are presumed to have been married. Then from there, the matrimonial property comes in. Yeah. Now the law has gone a step further and says you have to actually notify the registrar that you were actually married. From there, you'll actually be entitled. Otherwise, you'll not be entitled to a coin. You'll be someone who was just accompanying someone.
The reason why I'm asking this question is you must remember this very famous case. I'll not mention the specific case in this country involving very big names. But when the day of divorce came, one partner said, I don't know you, we're not married. So the other partner protested, no, we are married, we've been together for 12 years, for this amount of years. And the other partner, it is alleged, said, you might be married to me, but I'm not married to you. So where does this leave us?
And that is why the law, the way it is structured, if you are ignorant of the law, you'll actually suffer, and the law will not aid you. And that is why the Marriage Act is now very clear in terms of the forms of marriages that are recognized under the law. And that's why I'm saying, previously you had that presumption of marriage. Currently, you are required to actually notify the registrar and ensure, regardless, even if it's a customary marriage, even if it is a come-we-stay marriage, as long as you believe you're married. And that is why people are encouraged to do affidavits of marriages, but that does not end there. Failure to have established that there was a marriage, it is very hard to say now that the provisions of Article 45 would apply to you, because you must have a point from which you will say, this is where we actually now got married, and then you can apply the Matrimonial Property Act to the properties acquired from that date. Failure to which you can't even apply the Matrimonial Property Act because you do not know even when you actually married. One does not even know whether they are married or not to yourself. Yeah.
Before I cross over to Jackie on this point, I mean, Duncan, come on. You're mentioning too many, I mean, what is it called, laws and so many, what is it called, certificates. Oh, there's the marriage one, there's the one about succession, there's another one about prenuptial agreements, and we've just met, and I mean, we are in love, Duncan. We're just trying to build our life. I mean, we trust each other. There's no need for all this, you know. It feels like being dealing with someone I've never known.
Kiprop, I always tell people that there's a saying that love is blind. And when people meet, it is the same way like when the banks are actually seducing you to take a loan. When there's default, you'll see when they are seducing you, they'll send very beautiful ladies. Yeah. When there's default, you'll see very harsh men in black coming for your property. The same way, when you are actually seducing each other and you want to actually get into a marriage, most of these things, even the prenup, and I agree with my colleague panelists, it's not something that should actually come out. Someone will actually say you're acting in bad faith. So it's very rare, in fact, in Kenya to hear about those prenups. But at the point of dissolution, then the reality dawns on you that there are other aspects that must be looked into. And that is why the Act now comes in to actually help and ensure that there is that division. Because most of the times, these parties cannot even sit down and talk and agree in a civil way, like my colleague panelists did agree that, okay, I'm going to leave this for you, I'm going to give you this car, I'm going to leave to go with this car. Ideally, the longer a marriage subsists, the presumption is the more wealth the marriage will acquire. And the presumption then is that the more issues you'll have in terms of division of property, because you have a lot. It is very hard for you to find after a marriage has subsisted for 20 years for someone to say, I'll just walk away. Because it is like I've had some commentaries here that there is a time of my life that will have been wasted. I'll not account for it. So to a large extent, you then understand that it is then important for you to juxtapose that with the reality on the ground.
Yeah.
And that is why the Act will always come in to aid you and in a way also help your children.
Okay.
Yeah.
Allow me to bring in Edwin. Edwin, this is a very personal question and you're not obliged to respond to, but have you been in maybe another relationship or another marriage setting after the last one? And if not, then in the next one, that if you think you will be, will your perhaps your experience with the past relationship and having to leave most of your investments or your assets behind inform anything when you're going into a new relationship?
Actually, we're having this discussion right now with my colleague just here about it. I'm actually in the process of dating someone and trying to head towards that area. But I was mentioning to her that one of the things that I need to deal with now before it gets very serious is having a discussion on some of these things. You see, for me, it's an experience that I have had. And so once bitten, twice shy.
Yeah.
And so it's become, for me, I'm making these decisions consciously, knowing that the person that I am with right now will need to understand a few things and will need to come to an agreement. So that I do not expect it to end because I'm taking a lot of other measures that I didn't take in the previous one.
Yeah.
But just in case it does, which I don't think so, we should be able to know that we don't need to fight about it.
Okay.
We don't need to fight about it. We don't need to get lawyers. Sorry, my colleague there. We don't need to get lawyers. One of the reasons
Duncan will be jobless.
But one of the reasons that I wanted to ask Duncan especially is so not everyone owns land. Not everyone has bought a house.
Yeah.
Not everyone was blessed to have 2 cars like me, or have a microwave, or have what. Some people are just living in a 1-bedroom house, or even a bedsitter with a few things here and there.
Yeah.
And when they separate, the husband just ups and goes. I've also heard of incidents where you come back home and you find your wife has moved out with the children and everything in the house. You find yourself with nothing in the house. What kind of remedy do such people get in terms of matrimonial property? And most likely they can't afford a lawyer.
Yeah, okay. Before I allow Duncan to respond to that, maybe Jackie just wants to mention something regarding your off-air conversation.
I think what I want to mention is that maybe you need a lawyer before you do it. So that you don't need them later.
Yeah.
So maybe you need a lawyer before you do this.
So that you don't need them later in your life?
Yes.
But I mean, Jackie, before I let you go, I mean, love is what binds us. How do we do all these things without, I don't know, is it destroying the sanctity of love or without looking like we mistrust each other?
Okay. I heard the lawyer say love is blind. We say that so much.
Yeah.
But it's not deaf and dumb.
Oh.
No.
I like that.
At least we can use other faculties. And so we even though we are in love, we need to not lose logic. We need not to lose understanding, Love does not mean that, everything is rosy, everything is going to be good. Not really. We need to be open enough to discuss issues that may find us. At the altar, if we wed, we are told for better or worse.
Yeah.
And it is in the Bible. Why is it there? Because they know that worse will come. Even though at that time we don't think it will come, and I don't think even as we say those vows, we realize that we are saying worse, So even though there's love, it doesn't mean that there's no challenges, there will no be difficulties.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we should embrace it all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jackie. And definitely, I'm sure Edwin is waiting for the response from Duncan, but that will have to be after the break because I still have a couple of questions myself for him, including what happens when one partner does not reveal what they own, and suddenly when we divorce and we are about to share, we realize you own billions of properties that I have never known of. All that after this quick commercial break.
you on Nyota. Pata channel sita zaidi when you pay for more than 1 month on Nyota Bouquet. Enjoy more entertainment on Nyota.
Lucozade. Energy to get through it.
Fresh fried ginger has ginger oil, which is good for a healthy living lifestyle. It combines wonderfully on salads, stir fries, when basted on roasted meat, or simply sprinkled on your favorite dish. Now available in 250 ml, 500 ml, and 1 liter.
Can you get yourself inside my room? Let me take you up. Take you up. Let me take you down. Lay you down. Let me show you up. Show you up. Let me turn you on. Turn you on. Let me show you some good lo 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 lo. Lo 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 lo. Let me show you good lo 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 lo.
To get Lolo by Omar Lay, dial star 812 804 hash. Skiza, Non-Nation.
This Sunday on Property Focus, we're going to be showcasing the most luxe 140 square meter apartment in Nairobi. Yes, I said it. We're going to showcase this, and you can only catch it on Property Focus this Sunday at 5:30 p.m. only on NTV.
Babe, I'm at KFC. Do you want anything?
I'm actually not that hungry, babe.
I'm actually not that hungry, babe.
Coming right up.
Try the new KFC Duo Bucket. 4 delicious pieces of KFC chicken, 4 zinger wings, and chips. The perfect sharing meal for 2.
Lucozade. Energy to get through it.
Thank you for staying with your world on NTV. This morning we are talking about matrimonial property after divorce with my guest Duncan Okacha, an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, joining me in studio this morning, as well as Jackie Kerr. She's a blended family coach, and Edwin Kibudhu, an MSME business development advisor and consultant, who also this morning is helping us with this personal story to help us lay the ground for this conversation on how matrimonial property should be shared after divorce. And Duncan, before we went for that break, I remember Edwin had a question for you regarding the issue of being in a relationship where we have all contributed to this property, but you just wake up one day and either the wife or the husband has disappeared with everything. Do we have any remedy in the law?
Yes, indeed. That's a very important question from Edwin, because there are many ways in which we find people have ended these marriages. And you find that some people just decide to wake up and go. And they go with whatever you believe you have actually amassed. That by itself is something that you can actually go to court, and you can actually claim that particular contribution that you believe, or your entitlement to that particular property. Many times it becomes very hard for men to go to court to claim what we call household goods. it comes from the natural background of men that you feel how will I be seen? Sufuria and you know, vijiko. So many, it's very rare, and I've not seen such. When that happens, people are even advised by their fellow men, you move on. So I've not seen that, but the entitlement is there in terms of the law. However, there's also an indication whereby Edwin is saying is when you cannot even afford a lawyer, whether you have property or you don't, or you have the property or you don't have property. Indeed, we have a fully fledged mediation aspect in the courts nowadays. Court annexed mediation. So that even when you just go to court and indicate that this is the issue, the courts can provide a mediator in such particular instances, and the mediator can mediate between yourself and your estranged wife or your estranged husband to the extent of the issues of property. As I've said, many a times you find that at the point of separation, people do not see each other eye to eye. They may not even be able to talk. Yet the issues can be distilled very easily if a mediator comes in. And a mediator is not a judge, is not a magistrate. A mediator can be you and me, can be a pastor, can be someone, a counselor like Jackie. They can come in and reason with both of you, and you understand the facets, and it saves you a lot instead of going through the entire process. And that mediation is actually recognized by law, and the courts will adopt it. So it is not something to shy away from just because you may not be able to afford and access justice. But even as I say so, allow me to just respond to Jackie, because Jackie has indicated that at the point of marriage, and when you are saying your vows, you actually say for poor, for worse, and all that. She conveniently did not go to the very end of it, because it tells you, you actually finish and say that until death do you part. So as you're making these vows, you are not supposed to envisage any other thing that will part you apart from death. So that these issues of prenuptials, this issue of any arrangements before, it does not find its place in religion.
Because we know it's only death that
it is all, you love each other and you do not want any other thing. Problems will come in ups and downs, but and when it is that point, that is where the law of succession kicks in. But unfortunately, and like she said, reality is there. Unfortunately, people forget these vows very fast, and reality means that you actually find ways of dissolving the marriage. Then the Matrimonial Property Act kicks in, and it is then important to then discuss this. But it is very rare for you to discuss these matters upfront.
Okay. And now that you've mentioned, Jackie, maybe is something very important. But at least from where I sit, depending on how we handle the divorce, that's what determines how I'm actually going to move on. Because if it's messy, chaotic, and involves perhaps even being disadvantaged when it comes to how the property will be divided, it clearly demotivates you, demoralizes you, and that affects the way you move on.
Yeah, moving on after divorce is important, and I totally agree with what the lawyer has said. Moving on after divorce is important, but some of us get stuck because healing is it's not a passive activity. For you to heal from the pain and heartache, it's not passive. It requires you to work it. It requires you to do something with it so that you can be better at the end of the day. There are people who talk about their divorce even 7 years from now, 10 years from now, and it still hurts them. And it's because they've not taken that process to find space or to find people who can work with them so that they can heal. And if your ex-spouse is not healed, then comes the other challenge. And the other challenge now is, you know, we are still parents. You're still parents with your ex.
Yes.
So the challenge becomes in co-parenting. And this is where you find that somebody uses their children to get back at their ex, and children are also alienated. And you alienate your children from the other parent because you want to get your revenge. But you see, at the end of the day, the person, you will win the battle, but your children will lose it.
Okay.
Yes.
Allow me to hold you there, because this moving on thing sometimes is a problem, because there are those who believe that for you to move on, you should And I suspect maybe Edwin might be one of them. Moving on means you forget about everything and you just focus on building yourself and taking yourself forward, which is one way of moving forward. But there are also those who will tell you, Jackie, for you to move on, you must address these issues. For instance, even those issues of property, so that you don't move with a lot of hate in your heart.
Moving on is not just one way fits all. If somebody feels like they need to pursue their justice, that is where lawyers are there to support you in that journey. And so that you sort out the property and the justice, the law way of getting justice. So just because somebody has gone to courts to get justice, to get what legally they believe belongs to them, it does not mean that that person is not healed. Yeah.
Okay.
You can pursue it, but also pursue your mental health. That is not part of mental health. It's something different.
Okay.
And you can do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Duncan, let me just come back to the basics of this, this law again. Because so now we have agreed that as it is, the law, despite the loopholes, is we share according to what you contributed. But again, there's still the issue of how do we, first of all, how do we calculate this contribution? But we have talked about that. But now that we have, let's say we have a car and a house, and we decide that, yes, we are going to do this as per contribution. We have already decided that you contributed 70% to this house or this car, and I contributed to 30%. But what do we do from there? How far does the law and the courts go in executing this, so that we don't see ourselves in a situation where, yes, we agreed that 70% is used, but once we dispose the asset, I take 100% of it?
That is actually now the execution stage. In any litigation process, the end of it, once you have a judgment, it has to be executed in one way or another, and execution is a whole process. In this particular instance, the moment that decision has been made and apportioned, it is an order of the court. It is a decision of the court. And everyone is supposed to abide by it unless you appeal or you actually apply to review it successfully. To that particular extent, what is expected is that the value of this property can only be ascertained mainly through valuation processes. So that valuation will be done, and if this property is worth 1 million, it will then mean that either the party that wants to remain with that property, if it is a house, a car, ought to compensate the other party in monetary terms to the extent of that share.
Who does this valuation?
We have valuers in this country. They are actually, it's actually a whole profession, like the legal profession, and they are available at a cost, obviously, and the cost will obviously be borne within the cost of the assets. However, once that valuation is done by them, then you actually, and the courts can even order for that valuation directly. But to that particular extent, that value, if you do not have the amounts to compensate your ex in terms of the apportionment, then that property is going to be liquidated and then apportioned in terms of that. So if there's any violation at any given point, there are processes in court in terms of a contempt of court application, and that party will be punished by court. So in terms of implementation, it is something that once the orders are there, it is straightforward. I've not had major issues in terms of implementing.
Okay. So someone earlier on raised an issue of polygamous marriages. And so we start doing this when we are with you. And then all of a sudden, we have developed, let's say, property worth 10 million. And then along the way, you realize that maybe you need to remarry. And then also along the way, you realize that you also need to marry another second or third wife. How does this play out? Even before I considered leaving the marriage.
That's actually a real situation that befalls many marriages and families and couples. Because we come from an African setup where polygamy is allowed. And to a large extent, the Marriage Act has now actually envisaged that with the permission, obviously, of the existing wife. To that particular extent, the Marriage Act also was alive to that particular fact and indicated that when you have married a lady called A, and you've amassed a certain amount of wealth, at the point where you are marrying Lady B, it will actually mean that the properties that you, or the wealth that you acquired before Lady B came in are actually exclusive to the two of you. So
if it's 10 million, it's exclusive to us.
It is exclusive to you. The new wife or the younger wife does not qualify or cannot share in this particular property. However, the properties now, or the wealth that you amass after Lady B has actually come into play, those properties are now equally shared amongst the three of you. Now, from this point to going forward, any property is an entitlement of the first wife, together with the second wife and yourself.
Okay.
Any other, it applies like that as you proceed. But one major issue is that the Act itself has indicated that for properties that are in a monogamous marriage, you cannot come and say that I'm gifting someone, I'm gifting my brother, I'm gifting my mother, I'm gifting mpango wa kando, this particular asset, because by itself, even if it is under the name of the man, it is a matrimonial property by itself. You can only gift it out with the consent of the wife.
Okay.
And that is something that many people forget, that you can just make a decision on any property.
Actually, let me just allow both Jackie and Edwin to respond to this, because let's bring this lower to the level, the village level. So, I mean, Edwin is married to Jackie. They own several properties, one of them including a wheelbarrow. But Edwin has a younger brother, and he decides that my younger brother, let's say it's actually a car, let's call it a car. They have 4 cars. And Edwin has 4 cars, and he decides, no, why not gift one of my younger brother just the other car? What would be the problem with that? But anyway, let me just get your reaction, Edwin. Do you think this is something you need to consider, consult your wife before you gift something very small, like a wheelbarrow, for instance?
I was raised from a very good Christian, strict background, where we were taught that when you marry someone, you become one. And when you become one, it means some of these decisions need to be consulted. Like if your body has your heart and your lungs, and your heart cannot decide to pump blood without consulting your brain, and so forth. So you're one. And so I think when it comes to such big things, okay, the small things like buying your brother a phone, you know, a birthday gift.
Can you imagine?
Those ones is okay. But big things, like when you say, I think I want to gift my brother a car, or I want to gift him a land, or an apartment that I bought, I need to gift him, then those are decisions that you might need to consult with the wife. That's my opinion with it.
Let me just get Jackie's opinion, and before I ask her the next question, Jackie.
I think you should consult, and also the perception of consulting. Is it that you're perceiving consulting like asking for permission?
Yes, that is where the problem is, especially for people of my gender.
It is the perception that you're getting. You're consulting. You're not asking for permission. You're negotiating. So if you look at consulting as asking for permission, then you feel the yuck. But if you're looking at it as just a negotiation, that this is what I want to do, what do you think, then you don't feel that badness. But I want to say one thing that I would, I don't know if I can ask this, that I would wish the lawyer to
respond to,
to just clarify. I deal with families that have these dynamics, blended families, and there's a lot of dynamics about it. And I'm also a woman. One of the things that I've come to realize, and you know, it's not the women that make the choice to be polygamous. It is the men that make a choice to be polygamous. There are different marriages in Kenya. Maybe we can, if you can just specify the different marriages, and are all these marriages potential polygamous marriages, or are there different marriages that cannot overturn and become polygamous?
Okay. Did you get her question correctly?
Yes. Indeed, in the last discussion, we actually dealt with the different forms of marriages, because it is actually now provided under the Marriage Act. But it is mainly influenced by religion and by culture. Because we have statutory marriages, we have Islamic marriages, we have Hindu marriages, and to a large extent, it is influenced. Like if you look at the Islamic marriages, they are outrightly polygamous from the word go, because you can actually marry up to wife number 4, properly and legally. Christian marriages, statutory marriages have now, under the Act, been indicated as potentially polygamous with the permission of the existing wife or wives. So if you look at it in the real sense of it, that is a reality that is there, and it is informed by our traditions. Customary marriages were automatically potentially polygamous. So that's why in terms of the issue of matrimonial property, it is only important that that aspect is covered and it is dealt with properly. And even in when Jackie is counseling most of these families, that is a reality, because it's not illegal per se now to actually have 2 or 3 wives. And they always say that men are born potentially polygamous. I don't know how true that is, but that's a whole controversial topic. But Edwin, in my view, Edwin is one of the rare species of men in terms of the discussion that we have. Because the reality is that most men, and I heard what Kiprop said, will actually take it like if you are told that you cannot give to your brother, you cannot give your brother this very old car without the consent of your wife. Many have a problem with that. And that's why I'm saying it is a whole area that once explored, you'll actually feel the heat. This is an area that has not been tested, but violations are happening day in, day out. To a large extent that even the money that that has been saved, you decide that I'm going to send to my mother, I'm going to send to my brother as pocket money. That is matrimonial property. It must have the consent of both parties. And consent here does not just mean consultations. It is consultations, consensus, and someone is in agreement. The moment one party is not in agreement, you cannot proceed and utilize. So it's a whole area that is there in law, and I believe in the fullness of time, it is something. So it applies both to the small property, what we call small property in quotes, and now to what we believe is now the bigger properties like Edwin has indicated. It applies across the board.
All right. Before I take your final round of, let's say, closing remarks, let me just ask you to comment on something else that a colleague asked, and this is regarding people who we are in the same relationship. It's a joint thing. We are contributing and working together. But on the side, you find out that they have been developing property on the side. And when the day of divorce comes, we realize that while we have 10 million that we need to jointly own and need to let's say, divide or share, you also have an additional 3 billion shillings you may develop on the side.
In fact, Kiprop, that is an issue that exists. I even had yesterday the Safaricom indicating that they have over 200 million of unclaimed M-Pesa savings. And most of that is because the way we are, especially the male gender, we do our things in a way, in a clandestine manner. And unfortunately, your spouse may not know everything that you are doing, every asset that you have invested in. And it brings a lot of problems later on. But in the essence of dissolution, now we are not talking about death, the dissolution of this marriage, and one spouse realizes that the other spouse has, during the pendency of this particular marriage, amassed certain wealth. It then means that at the point of realization of that, that wealth becomes matrimonial property, whether you knew it or you didn't know it. It is matrimonial property because you've acquired it. Remember the Constitution, Article 45.
But I acquired it alone.
It cannot be alone, because this lady was also taking care of your children. This lady may have been, companionship itself is support and giving you the peace of mind.
So we have to go back and again decide this 3 billion shillings, how she could have contributed.
When it does not matter, because you acquired it within the parameters of this particular marriage. And to a large extent, even if it is 10 years after divorce, and the realization comes in, even after you've gone through this matrimonial property process and divided, if she realizes that later on there was hidden wealth that you actually did hide, then that becomes, she can actually move to court and bring it in terms of matrimonial property. One thing you should know is that it is not a must that you go to court on matrimonial property when there is separation. You can even go to court on a property where you just want a declaration whether it is matrimonial or not, but you are still, there is no separation, you are still within a marriage. But just for that definition, you can actually move to court. So there's that.
Is this the case where sometimes wives receive the husband's phone call by mistake, alafu naambiwa ile ploti yenu iko Kiambu Road, iko tayari, and we have a property on Kiambu Road? Anyway,
many do not receive by mistake. Many just get their way to the phone and they see that.
Anyway, Jackie, as we wrap up this conversation, you deal with these issues every day, and the quarrels and even the causes for divorce. How much would you attribute maybe the quarrels among couples and even the causes for divorce to these issues of dishonesty, where people don't come clean on how you know, the property that they have and all that?
I think most of the time that is what happens. But also, like I mentioned, divorce is not a one day. It's the marriage deteriorates pole pole. She eats on the marriage pole pole. By the time we walk away, it's an accumulation of a lot of things that were not fulfilled, or a lot of heartaches, a lot of things that did not go right. Yeah.
Okay. Now that, I mean, yes, we're talking about matrimonial property after divorce, but really, I mean, at least from where I sit, divorce is not the ideal situation, because no one goes into marriage wanting to separate. Maybe you can just use a minute to maybe talk to us about your experience and maybe how people can prevent, see the problems that they have now and try to prevent ending up in situations where they have to separate, especially in a very messy and ugly manner.
Okay. One of the things that is important is first in the choice of the person that we get married to. As we are seated here and we've talked for so many hours about matrimonial property, and even the effect that it has on us, it means that the person you choose to marry is one of the most important decisions that you are making as a person, whether you're a lady or a man. So you need to be very intentional about it. You need to plan and prepare for your family life. And that means you need maybe to get into premarital classes that I know churches offer for free. You need to equip yourselves with what do we need to do and how do we plan to live a better life. Because as they say, if you plan to fail, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. So plan for it and be intentional in making the marriage work. Relationships like marriage are a living thing. So if they are not watered, if they are not fed, they'll die, just like a plant.
Okay. Let me just take some quick feedback from social media as we wrap the conversation, if we have them ready. Remember, we asked you how you think matrimonial property should be divided. Yes, we have Caleb who says, first of all, before I comment on property division after divorce, marriage should be a contract and divorce details should be included in the contract. Where? Very interesting comments there and perspectives. Raphael Kibe says, everyone's contributions from the debt of marriage should be calculated and be shared in that ratio. If he or she has contributed nothing, they have to live with nothing. Thank you, Raphael. Very strong opinions. Isaiah says, point to note, I do not support divorce. However, in case of divorce, I support that the one who contributed the most towards ending of the relationship should get the least. I don't know. We don't even have time enough to respond to that very controversial, comment there. But yes, we have to wrap up this conversation. I'll give each one of you 30 seconds to give us your closing remarks. Let me start with you, Edwin.
Okay, so I have advice for three type of people. Number one, for those who are not married or are looking to get married. Pay attention, enjoy the blindness of love. But pay attention to the smell, the taste, the touch, everything else that come along with it. Right? For those who are married, just just learn the law. I can say there's a lot I've learned today from my brother Robert here.
Yeah.
There's a lot that I've learned. Learn the law. I'm not saying you protect yourself. Learn yourself, and if there are things that you've been doing wrong, try and change them. Finally, to those who are separated or divorced or in the process, it's never that serious. You don't need to fight.
Okay.
You don't need to fight over property and all these things. There's help out there. There's mediation.
Yeah.
I'm actually a certified mediator.
Okay.
In that case.
Okay.
Yeah. So just take help. And there's also groups. I mean, a group called Divorce Care.
Yeah.
Which I've been through for the last year, and it helps. You don't need to fight, and look after the children.
Okay.
Look after the children.
Very comprehensive, of course, closing remarks by Edwin there. Jackie?
First, I've learned a lot today from this conversation, and I think it's a conversation that needs to be more, the awareness needs to be more.
Yeah.
For me, for those who are married, what I can tell them is that a marriage is a living thing, so be intentional and mindful about watering it.
Yeah.
For those that are divorced, individually seek your healing, and then think about healthy co-parenting.
Yeah.
Because just because the dad and mom are not living together, kids still need a relationship with their parents.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Dan, can I allow you to close the conversation for us today? Maybe you can use that to respond on whether Edwin is right on whether we should fight or not.
Indeed, that may not be a choice for one spouse, because if the other spouse chooses to fight, you are in the fight whether you like it or not. However, the reality that we have is that the Matrimonial Properties Act that we have is not fair, especially to the female gender, and there's a lot of need to review it in line with the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and the Maputo Protocol to ensure that the issue of division is clear, because without that there'll be a lot of unfairness coming from the courts because we do not have a streamlined way. Again, it is not fair because you find that even when you're dealing with the matrimonial property in terms of the Islamic law, the Qadi is supposed to determine the division. The Qadi does not have, or the Chief Qadi does not have the parameters upon which to distribute. It depends with his own belief, his own cultural background, and to a large extent you find that even you cannot have a female Qadi. So you find that you have to subject yourself to a man every given time.
Who will be biased,
who may be presumed to be biased. There's need to relook at the law. Parliament should deal with it, and all other organs. But where we are, there is still some light.
All right. Thank you very much. That's where we have to leave it this morning, because this conversation is definitely huge. As Jackie mentioned, it has to continue and more awareness has to be created. But many thanks to you for keeping us company from 7 a.m. to right now it's 9 a.m. We've been talking about matrimonial property after divorce, what happens, who should take what, and what does the law actually say. And many thanks to also my guest this morning, Edwin Kibudu. I'm MSME, I beg your pardon, business development advisor and consultant, who was also chosen to give us his personal story on divorce. Jackie Kea, she's a blended family coach, as well as advocate of the High Court of Kenya, that is Duncan Okach. That's where we leave it this morning. Many thanks from me and the entire team. It's goodbye. But remember, tomorrow we'll be back with yet another exciting conversation, and this time we will be talking about livestock and meat products and value addition from 7 a.m. See you then.